Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be talking about another episode from Season 8. This is The Unthinkable. If you enjoy these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. The Unthinkable was written by Dan Allman and directed by Ralph Waite. At the beginning of the episode, the various kids are leaving school and they have just gotten their report cards. Elizabeth is being teased. We're not sure what that's about. They get home and Jeffrey and Serena talk with Rose, and we find out that Jeffrey is not doing so well in some of his subjects, particularly spelling. So he's going to need to work on that. We also find out that Elizabeth is being teased and is none too happy because she got straight A's and people are calling her teacher's pet and just being nasty to her. And John is very proud of Jim Bob because he has raised a number of his grades, although he's still not doing so good in history, but he thinks, what do I need to know that for? But John is very proud and happy to sign his report card. John hears that Elizabeth is upset and on the porch, so he goes out there to talk to her. And again, he set up a shot so that he comes up behind her, and we can play a lot of that scene just right in one place from the camera. And it really isn't until he turns, John goes over to the other side, that then we're going to need to bring the camera around for a close-up on John. But for a lot of it, we can see both their faces, and there's no need to do a lot of extra moving of the camera for that purpose. One of my favorite scenes in this episode is this adorable scene where John is reading comics to John Curtis, and they are interacting, and just so cute.
His face.
It's Mommy, Annie.
That is baby bird.
The primary storyline in this episode is about the Army, and one of the soldiers that Jason trained, Ted Lapinsky, we've seen him before in episodes. He was a bit of someone who just couldn't get it right, and Jason had to really work hard to get him up to speed, so to speak. And he's now doing so well. He is leading training marches and things like that and brings his team in first. And Jason wants to recommend him for one of 6 drill instructor positions, jobs that is opening up. And the master sergeant is like, no way. No, I don't think he's right for it. When Jason mentions it to Ted, Ted says, oh, he'll never let it happen because he's anti-Semitic. Ted shares with Jason that he just got a letter from a family back in Europe, in Poland, that his grandfather died. And he's very upset about this because he was very close to him and he was a real role model in his life. Jason suggests that since Ted has the weekend off, that he come home with Jason and spend the weekend with the family, and Ted agrees. So we're very happy to have Ted come join us for the weekend and experience more about country life because he grew up in the city. Once again, I noted some of the shot choices that Ralph put together when filming this, when directing it. And in this case, where we're coming around the kitchen table, he set up the camera and everybody's seating around the table so that initially the camera's just facing one direction and there's no situation where they're going to have to turn the camera completely around and relight a whole new direction in order to finish the scene. This would be much more time effective in being able to get all the coverage needed. So we have this shot, and these might not be the seats that everyone normally sits in, but in this case, I don't think anybody complained because most of the family who have regular seats are sitting in their seats. And so they've just filtered in the other people, Jeffrey and Serena and Rose and then Ted, into spots where family members that aren't there would normally be seated. We get a fun little montage of the Waltons teaching Ted about country chores. They have him out feeding chickens. They've put him in a pair of overalls. Then Jason gets him to milk Myrtle, and then he is feeding slop to the pigs. And he says, this I understand, throwing scraps to the pigs. I can do that.
Hey, let me feed him. I got nothing against feeding pigs. I just don't like to eat them.
Heading to Godsey's store, Jason is driving what was John Boy's car, and he pulls up, and then he does a 360 in front of the store. And I noted that if this shot was being done, if they needed to set it up and see exactly where the car was going to go, or if they needed to do more than one take, because the car then had made tracks in a circle, they would have had to, upon resetting, sort of brush out, have somebody go in and get rid of all of the marks of that circle that was made so they could do another take and that you wouldn't see that those circles already existed. So some of the resetting that can go on between takes. Ted has shared a fair bit about his family back in Chicago growing up, and there was a delicatessen that they had, and I think it was his uncle or something that had the delicatessen. And so at Godsy's store, he shares with Corbeth and Ike how it would have all been laid out, and here were the meats, and here were the cheeses, and here was this and that, and just it becomes a story point about this delicatessen. So we've got this in our minds now as an audience. Early in the episode, I noted that it looked like they were probably in Franklin Canyon for certain shots. Again, I know the back lot of Warner Brothers and those jungles, little lanes that we used all the time. So I went, this looks like Franklin Canyon, which when we would go out on a location, they always wanted to get enough things that they could shoot in that day because you didn't want to take the time to have to move back to the studio and then go on to a new set. So even if scenes maybe could have been shot on the back lot, they might choose to shoot them to make for a full day of filming on location. So in this case, Jason and Ted go fishing. And so we could have done it in Drusilla's pond, but in this case, because they were out there, they were able to use the bigger reservoir that was at Franklin Canyon. In the evening, we have all been enjoying Ted's company, and he has taught us all how to do the hora, how to dance that. And so as we're all enjoying that, suddenly Ted is in the middle, and then he drops to his knees, and we're all not sure if he's okay. And what he shares is horrifying to all of us because he says in this letter that came from family members, they talk about how, about the Warsaw Ghetto in Poland and how the Nazis worked to break that. And his grandfather was one of the leaders of the rebellion. And he was not killed, but he was captured, and he was taken to a place called Treblinka, which was a slave labor camp. And a concentration camp. He said, although they knew about the labor camps, they did not know about these extermination camps, and that his grandfather was killed by poison gas. Jason and Ted have a sweet moment later on when Jason reminds Ted that at one point there was this song that Jason had sung that he said was a favorite of his grandfather's. And so he says, let's sing this in honor of your grandfather. And they do.
Sweet dreams will ever take me home.
And then we see Rose come in to talk with John because she just can't believe that what Ted said is true, and that they could possibly be trying to kill a whole group of people, a whole race of people, and asks if there's someone John can call to try and find out if this is true. And John said, yeah, he knows a senator and he will call him. So John does call the senator, and he gets word from the senator that no, this is not true. And John then talks with Ted and says, sometimes propaganda can be as dangerous and as hurtful as bullets. And so his feeling is, from what the senator said, that that it is propaganda about the extermination camps, and that there is no sense, according to the senator, that that's actually happening. The mountain was a huge inspiration and an important part of Grandpa's life. And John talks about that and says, well, maybe it's time to go and take a picnic up onto the mountain. And so Ted's all for that. The family has gone to church, and so they said, let's prepare a picnic and enough for everybody. And can you make sandwiches? And Ted says, of course, the deli. So we see some fun shots of them in the kitchen with a stack full of sandwiches piled up, and potatoes cooking to make potato salad. And then he's testing the if the boiled eggs are done, and whether those are going to go in the potato salad or whether he's going to make deviled eggs. I'm guessing deviled eggs. Anyway, they are preparing this picnic. After church, Elizabeth and Jim Bob exit, and they're waiting for the others who have stopped to talk to Reverend Bradshaw. A mention of Reverend Bradshaw, but we don't actually see him in this episode. Meanwhile, a couple of girls, classmates, come out and are teasing about Elizabeth and about how she can't get a date because she gets straight A's, and they're kind of asking Jim Bob what he's doing. And anyway, these two girls, the brunette you see there is actually Erica Hunton, who was Holly, the little deaf girl in our first episode, The Foundling. And the other girl is a young actress, Mary Ann Oedy, who had not been on our show before. So those are two of our guest stars this week. Upset about what's been going on, Elizabeth said she's not going on the picnic. And then Ted said he doesn't think he's going to go either. And Elizabeth leaves, and Ted asks if maybe he can talk to her. So he goes out and climbs up into the treehouse and talks to her. And he says, he got good grades too. And he tells a fun story about his grandfather that just makes her feel better. And ultimately he says, initially he says, well, if you're not going, I'm not going. And then finally they sort of agree that, she says, well, I'll go if you go. So he has brought her around to agreeing to go on the picnic. They climb down, they head out, but I liked this wider shot that Ralph got where we can actually see the treehouse and how it's positioned up there. With these treehouse scenes, they would have had a camera on a crane, and they would have just raised that up so the camera was very steady, but just done all of these closer shots right there on that set. So this was not that they moved or created a treehouse on an interior set. Here, we would use the real thing. As the cars sort of carpool out to the mountain where we're going to have this picnic, we are once again in Franklin Canyon going by that lake that we see, that reservoir, and we are singing Clementine. One of the reasons we also wanted to go up onto the mountain was to visit Grandpa's grave and tend to it. Now, in this case, it is not the same grave site that we saw when we originally went up after Grandpa had died. That was up at Fraser Park. So in this case, they recreated a grave area here at Franklin Canyon. And because it was unlikely back in the day that the audience would have recognized that this was not the exact same location. You might now, because you can watch those two episodes next to each other. But in this case, it serves the purposes. Now, we're kind of cleaning it up. We're talking to Grandpa. And then we realize that Cindy and Rose and Ted have all felt they wanted to give us our privacy with Grandpa. And John says, go get him. The more the merrier. Grandpa loved people. So they go to bring the rest of the group to the gravesite. Talking with Ted, he tells Jason that he's decided that he doesn't want the drill instructor job. He actually wants to go over to Europe and be in a company that's over there. And he actually wants an opportunity to find his grandfather's grave so that he can say a prayer over it. So when Jason comes back over with Ted and the rest of the family to Grandpa's gravesite, Jason suggests that perhaps Ted say this prayer here, that it will honor our grandfather and his grandfather. So he does. He says this Kaddish, which is a mourner's prayer in the Jewish religion, and we all get to experience that with him and the heartfelt emotions of this prayer. In the final narration, it's said that we tragically later learned that indeed there were these extermination camps. So as we all knew, because as we watched this show, we knew the actual history of that time, and what the Waltons didn't know at that moment, of course, we all knew was true. In this episode, the character of Ted Lapinsky was played by Todd Susman. Now, he did 3 episodes as Ted Lapinsky, but he also was one of the PA announcers on the series MASH. So when you heard all those announcements all the time, he was one of a handful of actors that did just all kinds of those announcements. He also was in the film Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. He was in 20 episodes as Officer Shiflett in The Newhart Show. He was in Highway to Heaven, Twilight Zone, did an episode of Little House on the Prairie, and all kinds of other work. He's one of those working actors that you just see frequently in film and TV, and we were very happy to have him. Also in this episode, Melvin F. Allen played Master Sergeant Barnes. He was also in Ralph's film On the Nickel, as well as doing a lot of TV, including things like 6 episodes of Big Valley, The Rifleman, Ironside, etc., etc. And then I mentioned our 2 young actresses, including Erica Hunton from The Foundling and Mary. Now, in this, she was credited as Mary Anodi, and on her subsequent credits, it says that she then went by the name of Mary Ann Hermanson, as she did other TV like Family, Fame, and film and stuff like that. So you may recognize her, but not recognize the name in the credits between different segments of shows. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons about the episode The Unthinkable. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more episodes, more questions in and Ask Judy, and hopefully some more special guests. Thanks for watching.